A retired MMA fighter targets an old couple at their favorite restaurant, shoving the 78-year-old man to the ground and threatening to teach these fossils some manners. The massive bully towers over the terrified seniors, smashing their anniversary dinner while other elderly patrons cower in fear. But the quiet customer sitting alone in the corner booth isn't just another old man. This is Jackie Chan himself. The washed-up fighter has no idea he just terrorized innocent people in front of a martial arts legend who spent 50 years turning bullies into cautionary tales. While the thug demands the best table and threatens to shut down the restaurant forever, the action icon rises with deadly calm. The elderly victims recognize their savior and step back, knowing justice is about to be served. The bully keeps running his mouth, thinking he's intimidating another helpless senior, but he's actually seconds away from learning why some legends never retire. What happens when you pick the wrong fight at the wrong restaurant? Will the fighter survive discovering that real strength comes from protecting others? What happened next would shatter the bully's world forever. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass key turned in the lock with the same satisfying click it had made every morning for 18 years. Frank Kowalski stepped into the Golden Dragon restaurant as the first light of dawn painted Main Street in soft amber hues. At 72, his shoulders carried the gentle stoop of a former auto worker, but his movements held the quiet dignity of a man who had found his true calling. The restaurant welcomed him like an old friend. Red paper lanterns caught the morning light, casting warm shadows across mismatched tables that somehow fit together perfectly. The lucky cat statue, left behind by Mrs. Chun when she sold him. The place seemed to nod its approval as Frank switched on the lights. Fresh flowers from Betty's garden waited on the counter, bright marigolds that would grace the small shrine in the corner where incense had burned for 40 years. Frank tied his lucky red apron around his waist, the same one he'd worn since day one. Some people thought it was superstition, but he knew better. This apron had absorbed the love of thousands of meals, the gratitude of countless customers, the very soul of what made this place special. He began his morning ritual, polishing the tea service, arranging chopsticks, checking that every table setting was perfect. The front door chimed as Betty arrived, her arms full of vegetables from their backyard garden. After 47 years of marriage, they moved around each other in the kitchen like dancers who knew every step by heart. "Morning, sunshine," she said, kissing his cheek. At 72, Betty Kowalski was still the spunky seamstress who had stolen his heart at a church dance in 1976. Her silver hair caught the light as she unpacked tomatoes, green peppers, and herbs that would make today's dishes sing. "Sleep well?" Frank asked, though he already knew the answer. Betty had been up at 5:30, same as every day for the past 2 decades. Like a baby, Mrs. Patterson called. She and Harold will be in for lunch. Their usual table. Betty's eyes sparkled. The Pattersons had been coming twice a week for 5 years, ever since Harold retired from the steel mill. They were family now, like so many of their regulars. Frank nodded, already mentally preparing their favorite sweet and sour pork. That was the thing about the Golden Dragon. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a place where people belonged, where birthdays were celebrated and sorrows were shared, where the food tasted like home even if you'd never been to China. The morning prep continued in comfortable silence. Frank checked the soup stock while Betty arranged flowers at each table. Photos lined the walls, customers celebrating anniversaries, birthday parties, graduation dinners. This was their family album, the story of a community written in shared meals and happy faces. The aroma of ginger and soy sauce began to fill the air as Frank started the first batch of fried rice. Outside, Main Street was waking up. The hardware store owner swept his sidewalk, the barber raised his striped pole, the mailman began his rounds. Millfield was the kind of place where people still knew their neighbors' names, where handshakes meant something, where a restaurant could survive for 4 decades on good food and genuine kindness. At 11:29, Betty walked to the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open. Through the window, she saw Harold Patterson approaching with his walker, Marge at his side carrying a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. "Harold," Frank called out, wiping his hands on his apron. "Your table's waiting." The lunch rush was about to begin, and everything was exactly as it should be. Harold Patterson settled into the window booth with the careful movements of a man whose body remembered harder times. At 78, he still carried himself with the straight-backed pride of a steel worker, though the walker beside his chair told a different story about hip surgery and the relentless march of time. "Tea's coming right up," Frank said, already reaching for the pot. 5 years of the same routine had created its own language. Harold liked his tea strong. Marge preferred hers with honey, and neither needed to ask anymore. Marge smiled as she arranged her flowers in the small vase Frank provided. At 76, she moved with the careful grace of someone navigating the early stages of memory loss. But her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her Millfield Elementary's favorite third-grade teacher for 30 years. "Anniversary. Flowers?" Betty asked, stopping by their table with steaming cups. 52 years next month," Harold said, reaching across to squeeze his wife's hand. "Practice run for the real celebration." The lunch crowd began filtering in, a familiar parade of faces that made the Golden Dragon feel more like a community center than a restaurant. Roger and Helen Martinez chose a corner booth to quietly celebrate their 50th anniversary. 3 retired factory workers claimed their usual spot near the kitchen, already arguing good-naturedly about the Pirates' chances this season. A young mother with twin toddlers got the table by the window where the kids could watch cars go by. In the far corner sat the customer Frank thought of as Mr. Charlie, a mystery wrapped in politeness and daily routine. For 8 months now, he'd appeared twice weekly, always alone, always ordering the same sweet and sour pork combination. Maybe late 60s, compact and neat in his simple button-down shirts and dark slacks. He spoke softly when he spoke at all, tipped generously, and sometimes helped Betty clear tables when the lunch rush overwhelmed her. There was something different about Mr. Charlie, though Frank couldn't put his finger on what. The way he moved suggested physical confidence despite his age. His hands showed calluses that spoke of hard work. But what kind? When he helped with the heavy serving trays, he lifted them like they weighed nothing. When customers dropped things, he was always first to help, moving with surprising quickness. "More tea, Mr. Charlie?" Betty asked, making her rounds. "Please." His accent was slight but unplaceable, not quite American, but not obviously foreign either. "The soup smells wonderful today." "Frank's been working on that recipe for years," Betty said proudly. "Secrets in the stock." Mr. Charlie nodded appreciatively and returned to watching the street through his window. He seemed to notice everything: the mailman's route, the barber's customers, the rhythm of small-town life unfolding outside. Sometimes Frank caught him watching the other customers with the same quiet attention, as if memorizing their stories. The Martinez couple was struggling with the check, counting bills twice. Frank made a mental note to accidentally give them the senior discount they were too proud to ask for. Mrs. Chun had taught him that kindness came in many forms, and dignity was often the most important ingredient in any meal. "Beautiful couple," Mr. Charlie observed quietly, nodding toward the Martinez table. 50 years, Frank agreed. "That's what we're all hoping for around here." Something in Mr. Charlie's expression suggested he understood exactly what Frank meant. This wasn't just about marriage. It was about community, about places that endured, about values that lasted when everything else seemed to be changing too fast. The lunch crowd gradually thinned as the afternoon wore on. Harold and Marge finished their meal and prepared to leave, Harold wrestling with his coat buttons while Marge gathered her purse. Without fanfare, Mr. Charlie appeared beside their table. "May I help with that jacket, Mr. Patterson?" His hands were gentle but sure as he helped Harold into his coat, then steadied Marge as she stood. There was something almost protective in the gesture, like a grandson helping beloved grandparents. "Thank you, young man," Harold said with a grin. "My pleasure, Mr. Patterson." Mr. Charlie's smile was warm and genuine as the elderly couple made their way to the door. Mr. Charlie returned to his corner booth to finish his tea. Through the window, Frank watched him watching the street, those alert eyes missing nothing, as if he were keeping guard over their small piece of the world. The afternoon peace shattered like glass as a massive black Dodge Ram pickup roared into the parking lot, engine revving unnecessarily before finally cutting off. The truck took up 2 spaces, angled carelessly across the painted lines as if rules were suggestions for lesser people. Through the Golden Dragon's front window, The remaining customers watched a mountain of a man emerge from the driver's seat. 6'4" and easily 280 pounds, he moved with the swagger of someone accustomed to clearing rooms through presence alone. Faded MMA tattoos covered his arms like a roadmap of violence, with Cage Warrior spelled across knuckles. That had clearly seen extensive use. Frank felt his stomach tighten as the stranger approached the door. After 40 years in restaurants, he'd developed an instinct for trouble, and every alarm bell in his head was ringing. The door banged open harder than necessary, setting the brass bell into frantic chiming. The man, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour, surveyed the restaurant with obvious disdain. His bloodshot eyes took in the paper lanterns, the elderly customers, the gentle atmosphere with the expression of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. About time this town had some real food, he announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying the aggressive volume of someone spoiling for confrontation. The stench of whiskey and cigarettes preceded him like a toxic cloud. Roger and Helen Martinez looked up from their anniversary dessert, their celebration suddenly feeling fragile. The retired factory workers went quiet, sensing danger the way animals smell storms. Even the toddlers seemed to understand something was wrong, staying unusually still in their high chairs. Frank stepped forward with the diplomatic smile that had defused 1,000 minor conflicts. "Welcome to the Golden Dragon, sir. We have several nice tables available. I'll decide where I sit." The stranger cut him off, scanning the room until his gaze fixed on the Martinez couple. "That booth. I want that one." The elderly couple sat frozen, anniversary flowers wilting between them like hope itself. Roger Martinez, 74 years old and married for half a century, looked up with the confused expression of someone trying to understand why their special day had suddenly become a nightmare. "Sir, that table is occupied," Frank said gently. "But we have a lovely booth right over here with more privacy." Did I stutter? The stranger's voice rose, drawing frightened glances from the other customers. "I want that table, and I want it now. These fossils can find somewhere else to count their pennies." Betty appeared from behind the counter, her protective instincts overriding any concern for her own safety. "Now see here, young man. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez are celebrating their anniversary. Surely you can understand. Lady, I don't give a damn if they're celebrating the second coming. When I want something, I get it." He took a step toward the Martinez table, fists already clenching. "Time to move, Grandpa." Helen Martinez began to cry softly, 50 years of marriage reducing to this moment of public humiliation. Roger tried to stand, his arthritis making the simple movement an ordeal, but his hands shook so badly he could barely grip his cane. The restaurant held its collective breath. The other elderly patrons watched in horror, recognizing their own vulnerability reflected in the Martinez couple's terror. No one was young enough or strong enough to challenge this monster. The factory workers were in their 70s, Harold Patterson wasn't even there, and Frank was 72 with arthritic hands in his corner booth. Mr. Charlie set down his teacup with careful precision. His posture had changed completely, no longer the relaxed regular customer, but someone coiled and ready. His eyes never left the confrontation, but his body language spoke of calculations being made, distances being measured. "Please, sir," Roger Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible. "We'll move if you really need." "Damn right you'll move." The stranger's voice boomed through the restaurant. "And next time, maybe you'll think twice before taking up space that real customers might want." Frank moved toward the confrontation despite knowing he was no physical match for this mountain of violence. 18 years of protecting this sanctuary overcame any concern for his own safety. This was his place, these were his people, and sometimes a man had to stand up regardless of the odds. But as he approached, the stranger's attention shifted to him, and Frank saw something in those bloodshot eyes that made his blood freeze. This wasn't random bullying or drunken stupidity. This was calculated, purposeful, as if the man had come here looking for exactly this kind of confrontation. "Got something to say, old man." Frank Kowalski faced the mountain of violence with the quiet dignity that had carried him through 7 decades of life. His arthritic hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady as he tried once more to defuse the situation. "Sir, this is a family restaurant. Everyone is welcome here, but we ask that folks treat each other with respect. We've got a beautiful Table right over there with more room. And I'd be happy to. The words died in his throat as massive hands grabbed his shirt collar and slammed him against the wall beside the kitchen door. Pain shot through his 72-year-old spine as his body made contact with the hard surface, his legs buckling under the impact. "Listen here, old man." The stranger snarled, his whiskey breath hot against Frank's face. "This dump needs to learn some respect. I eat where I want, when I want, and I don't take suggestions from fossils who should have died off years ago." Betty's scream cut through the restaurant as she watched her husband of 47 years crumple against the wall. She rushed forward despite the danger, her 5'3" frame no match for the giant holding her husband, but love overriding every instinct for self-preservation. The other customers sat paralyzed by their own vulnerability. Mrs. Patterson gripped her purse with white knuckles. The young mother pulled her twins closer, shielding their eyes from the violence. The retired factory workers, men who had once built America's steel, could only watch helplessly as their bodies betrayed the courage their hearts still carried. Harold Patterson struggled to his feet despite Marge's desperate attempts to hold him back. At 78, with a walker and recent hip surgery, he was no match for anyone, but 52 years of protecting his wife overrode any concern for personal safety. "Let him go, you animal." Harold's voice cracked with age and fear, but it carried the authority of someone who had faced worse enemies in darker times. "Pick on someone your own size." The stranger released Frank, who slid down the wall clutching his chest, and turned his attention to this new challenger. Harold advanced with his walker, moving as fast as his damaged body would allow, while Marge wept behind him. "What did you call me, Grandpa?" The massive fist came around in a vicious backhand that caught Harold across the face, sending the elderly man crashing into a table full of chairs. The sound of metal walker clattering against wood echoed through the restaurant like gunshots. That Marge's scream joined Betty's as Harold hit the floor, blood running from his split lip. The man who had survived the Pacific Theater in 40 years. In steel mills lay motionless among the wreckage of chairs and table settings, his wife kneeling beside him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Harold, Harold, please." Marge's voice broke as she tried to help her husband sit up, her own frail hands shaking as she touched the blood on his face. The stranger stood over them both, feeding off their terror like some predator that had found the perfect hunting ground. "Maybe now you people will learn some manners. This is what happens when fossils forget their place." Betty fumbled for the phone behind the counter, her fingers shaking as she tried to dial 911. "I'm calling the police," she announced, though her voice held more hope than conviction. "The hell you are." He was across the restaurant in 3 strides, smashing the phone from her hands. Pieces of plastic skittered across the floor as the device shattered against the wall. "Nobody's calling anybody. This is between me and these old fools who think they run this town." The restaurant filled with the terrible silence of absolute fear. Every customer understood they were witnessing something beyond random violence. This was systematic, purposeful, designed to break spirits as much as bodies. To eye in his corner booth, Mr. Charlie had been motionless throughout the assault, but something fundamental had changed in his posture. He no longer sat like a regular customer enjoying his meal. Every line of his compact frame spoke of coiled energy, of decisions being made, of a man reaching the end of his patience. He stood slowly, his movement so fluid it seemed almost supernatural. The simple act of rising from his seat somehow commanded attention despite the chaos around him. When he spoke, his voice cut through the fear and panic like a blade through silk. "That's enough." The 2 words carried such quiet authority that even the massive stranger paused mid-threat. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward the corner booth, where the mysterious Mr. Charlie stood with the bearing of someone who had never backed down from anything in his life. The stranger laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that held no humor. "What did you say, Grandpa? You got something you want to add to this conversation?" But for the first time since entering the restaurant, uncertainty flickered in his bloodshot eyes. Something about this elderly man's sudden transformation suggested he had made a very serious mistake. Mr. Charlie stepped away from his corner booth with movements that defied his apparent age. Each step was precise, balanced, centered, the walk of someone who had never been uncertain about his place in the world. The transformation was so complete that even the terrified customers forgot their fear for a moment. watching this ordinary restaurant patron become something extraordinary. I said that's enough, he repeated, his voice carrying the steel of absolute conviction. You've terrorized these good people long enough. The stranger turned his full attention to this new challenger, initially amused by the audacity. You think you're going to stop me, old man? Look around. I just put two of your friends on the floor, and you're next if you don't sit back down and mind your own business. Mr. Charlie's response was to remove his simple button-down shirt with deliberate care, folding it neatly and setting it on a nearby chair. What the removal revealed stopped conversations and drew gasps from the elderly patrons. His lean frame showed the defined musculature of someone who had never stopped training, shoulders and arms marked by decades of conditioning that spoke of disciplines far beyond ordinary exercise. Small scars crisscrossed his torso, not the random marks of accidents, but the precise evidence of a lifetime spent perfecting dangerous arts. His stance shifted subtly, feet finding perfect balance, hands relaxed but ready. The quiet restaurant patron had vanished completely, replaced by something that radiated controlled power. My name is Jackie Chan, he said simply, as if introducing himself at a dinner party rather than confronting a mountain of violence. And you're going to apologize to these people. The revelation rippled through the golden dragon like electricity. Betty gasped from behind the counter where she knelt. Beside Frank, Marge Patterson looked up from Harold's bleeding face with wide eyes. The retired factory workers exchanged glances of disbelief and sudden hope. Jackie Chan. The Jackie Chan. Here, in their little restaurant, having tea and sweet and sour pork twice a week for 8 months. Mr. Charlie, the polite customer who helped clear tables and steadied elderly patrons, was one of the most famous martial artists in the world. The stranger's laughter died as his alcohol-fogged brain processed this information. Jackie Chan? You're kidding me. Jackie Chan's some little Chinese guy who does movie stunts. You're just another. He never finished the sentence. In one fluid motion that seemed to bend the laws of physics, Jackie plucked the beer bottle from the stranger's hand, spun it through the air in a perfect arc, and caught it without spilling a single drop. The move was so fast, so impossibly precise, that the massive fighter blinked twice before realizing what had happened. Jackie set the bottle gently on Harold's abandoned table and extended his hand toward his stunned opponent. It's not too late to do the right thing. These are good people who deserve your respect, not your anger. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. For a moment, something flickered in the stranger's bloodshot eyes. Confusion. Perhaps even a glimmer of recognition that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. But pride and alcohol proved stronger than wisdom. His massive fist came up in a haymaker that would have flattened most men, aimed directly at Jackie's temple with enough force to end the confrontation permanently. The punch never landed. Jackie flowed around the massive haymaker like water around a stone, the deadly punch whistling harmlessly past his ear. The stranger's momentum carried him forward into empty space, while Jackie materialized behind him, already positioning for what came next. The second punch came faster, a vicious uppercut that should have caught Jackie off guard. Instead, he redirected the blow with a gentle touch that sent the stranger stumbling into the wall where Frank had been slammed moments before. The impact rattled the building, but Jackie remained perfectly balanced, never having thrown a strike of his own. "Stop this," Jackie said calmly. "You're only going to hurt yourself." The response was a roar of frustration and a wild charge that sent chairs scattering. Jackie sidestepped the attack and guided his opponent's momentum into a table, which collapsed under the impact in an explosion of wood and dishware. The stranger rolled to his feet, now bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his rage escalating with each failed attempt to land a blow. What followed was unlike anything the elderly patrons had ever witnessed. This wasn't the brutal brawling they'd seen in movies. This was art. Jackie moved through the restaurant like he was dancing, turning every piece of furniture into part of his defense. When the stranger grabbed a chair to use as a weapon, Jackie tangled its legs with his discarded shirt, disarming him effortlessly. The serving counter became a vaulting horse as Jackie flipped over it to avoid a grabbing attempt. The hanging paper lanterns provided handholds that let him change direction midair. Even the shrine in the corner played its part, as Jackie used its base to redirect another wild charge that sent his opponent crashing into the empty booth where the Martinez couple had been celebrating their anniversary. Throughout the fight, Jackie never struck an offensive blow. Every movement was defensive, protective, designed to exhaust rather than injure. When the stranger threw punches, Jackie redirected them into walls or furniture. When he attempted tackles, Jackie guided him into empty space where he could crash harmlessly to the floor. The customers watched in amazement as their quiet, helpful Mr. Charlie demonstrated why he was a living legend. Betty helped Frank to his feet so he could see better. Marge had stopped crying over Harold's injuries, both of them mesmerized by the display of skill and compassion. Even the toddlers had gone quiet, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary, but it was Harold Patterson who spoke what everyone was thinking. "He's not trying to hurt him," the wounded veteran observed, dabbing blood from his split lip. "He's trying to teach him." Indeed, Jackie's every move seemed designed to demonstrate the futility of violence. Each failed attack left the stranger more winded, more frustrated, more aware that his size and strength meant nothing against true skill. The lesson was clear. Power without control was worthless. Aggression without purpose was self-defeating. The end came suddenly. The stranger, exhausted and humiliated, threw one final desperate punch with everything he had left. Jackie stepped aside at the last possible moment, and the massive fist shattered the front window in an explosion of glass. The stranger stood among the glittering shards, breathing heavily, blood trickling from superficial cuts. For the first time since entering the restaurant, he looked defeated, not just physically, but spiritually. The fight had been drained out of him by an opponent who refused to engage in mutual destruction. Jackie stepped carefully through the broken window frame, glass crunching under his feet, and extended his hand once again. "It's over. Let me help you up." This time, there was no mockery in the stranger's eyes as he looked at the offered hand. Something had changed, some fundamental shift that suggested the lesson had finally penetrated his rage-clouded mind. Slowly, painfully, he reached up to accept Jackie's help. That Jackie's strong hands pulled the massive fighter to his feet with surprising gentleness, brushing glass shards from his torn shirt with the care of someone tending a wounded friend rather than a defeated enemy. Blood trickled from shallow cuts on the stranger's arms and face, but his eyes showed something more profound than physical injury, the first crack in the wall of anger that had consumed him. "Easy," Jackie said softly, steadying the bigger man. As he swayed slightly, "The cuts aren't deep. You'll be fine." Inside the restaurant, the elderly patrons watched this display of compassion with wonder. Here was their quiet Mr. Charlie, revealed as one of the world's most famous fighters, showing mercy to someone who had terrorized them all just minutes before. Betty helped Frank to the broken window so they could see better, while Marge knelt beside Harold, both of them witnessing something that restored their faith in human decency. The stranger began, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "I don't understand. Why didn't you finish me?" Jackie smiled with genuine warmth, the same expression he'd worn while helping Harold with his coat countless times. "Because finishing someone isn't the point. The point is helping them find a better way." For a moment, standing among the glittering glass in the afternoon sunlight, it seemed like a miracle was unfolding. The stranger's breathing slowed, his fists unclenched, and something almost like peace crossed his battered features. The violence that had consumed him appeared to drain away like poison from a wound. "You're right," he said, nodding slowly. I've been hurting, and I took it out on good people. That ain't right. These folks never did nothing to me." Jackie placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Pain can make us do terrible things if we let it, but recognizing that is the first step toward healing." The stranger looked through the broken window at the restaurant's interior, seeing perhaps, for the first time, the elderly faces watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. Frank Kowalski, still holding his bruised ribs, but standing straight with quiet dignity. Betty, her silver hair disheveled, but her eyes bright with the possibility of forgiveness. Harold Patterson, blood still trickling from his split lip, but no hatred in his expression. "I should apologize," the stranger said, taking a step toward the window. "To all of them. Especially that old soldier I hit." Jackie nodded approvingly. That would mean everything to them. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with ourselves. The transformation seemed genuine, complete. Here was living proof that Jackie's philosophy was more than martial arts theory, that even the most violent person could find redemption through understanding and compassion. The elderly patrons began to relax, sensing that their nightmare was finally over. Jackie turned slightly to address the people inside. It's okay, everyone. Sometimes people just need someone to. The sucker punch caught him completely off guard. The stranger's right cross connected with Jackie's temple with devastating force, the sound of impact echoing off the restaurant's walls like a gunshot. Jackie's eyes rolled back as he crumpled to the sidewalk, his body hitting the concrete with a sickening thud that sent fresh glass shards skittering away from the impact. Inside the restaurant, Betty's scream shattered the afternoon air. Harold Patterson struggled toward the door despite his injuries, while Frank clutched the window frame in horror. The young mother gathered her twins protectively, and the retired factory workers stared in shocked disbelief. The stranger stood over Jackie's unconscious form, his facade of humility replaced by cold calculation. The remorse, the shame, the apparent transformation, all of it had been an elaborate deception, a predator's patience while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Stupid old fool," he muttered, shaking feeling back into his knuckles. "Thinks everyone's got a good heart just waiting to be saved." He knelt beside Jackie's motionless body and spoke loud enough for everyone inside to hear. "Tell your boyfriend here that this was just a warning." The stranger's voice carried the cold authority of someone delivering a message he'd been paid to deliver. He knelt beside Jackie's unconscious form like a victor claiming his prize, his earlier performance of remorse now revealed as pure manipulation. "This place is closing down," he announced, his words echoing off the restaurant's walls and settling into the hearts of the terrified patrons like ice. "The old-timers around here need to learn that progress don't wait for nobody." Betty burst through the front door, her maternal instincts overriding any concern for her own safety. She dropped to her knees beside Jackie, her small hands checking for signs of life, while her husband followed as quickly as his injured ribs would allow. "You monster," she cried, looking up at the massive figure looming over them. "He was trying to help you." The stranger's laugh was ugly, devoid of any humor or humanity. "Lady, your kung fu boyfriend just learned what happens when Hollywood meets reality. This ain't no movie where the good guys always win." Harold Patterson appeared in the broken doorway, leaning heavily on his walker, but driven by the same protective fury that had made him charge a mountain of violence to defend his wife. Blood still trickled from his split lip, but his eyes blazed with the fire of someone who had faced worse enemies in darker times. "What kind of man are you?" Harold demanded, his voice cracking with age and emotion. "He showed you mercy, and you—" "I'm the kind of man who gets paid to deliver messages." The stranger cut him off. "And here's the message, one way or another. The Golden Dragon is finished." He climbed into his pickup truck with deliberate slowness, savoring the fear radiating from the shattered restaurant. The engine roared to life with unnecessary violence, black smoke belching from the exhaust as he prepared to leave the scene of his victory. But before driving away, he rolled down his window and delivered his final threat. "You people got 1 week to start thinking about selling. Next time I come back, I won't be so gentle." The truck roared away, leaving behind the stench of burned rubber and diesel exhaust. In the distance, sirens wailed as someone, probably a neighbor who'd heard the commotion, had finally managed to call for help. Betty cradled Jackie's head in her lap, her fingers gently probing the swelling lump where the coward's punch had connected. "Frank, is he?" "He's breathing," Frank said, kneeling beside them despite the pain in his ribs. "Strong pulse. But that was a hell of a hit." Marge Patterson had joined her husband in the doorway, both of them staring at the aftermath with the shocked expressions of people whose safe world had just been invaded by pure evil. The young mother stood behind them, her twins clinging to her legs as she tried to process what they'd all witnessed. "Who was that man?" one of the factory workers asked, his voice shaking. "What did he mean about the restaurant closing?" Nobody had an answer. This hadn't been random violence or drunken bullying. It had been calculated, purposeful, delivered with the cold precision of someone following orders. But whose orders? And why target a harmless neighborhood restaurant that served tea and friendship to elderly customers? The ambulance arrived first, followed closely by two police cars. Paramedics worked quickly over Jackie's unconscious form, while officers began taking statements from witnesses still too shocked to provide coherent accounts. As Jackie was loaded onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttered open briefly. Through the haze of concussion, he managed to focus on Betty's worried face. "The restaurant," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't let them win." "Shoo," Betty said, squeezing his hand. "You just worry about getting better. We'll take care of everything else." But as the ambulance pulled away, its red lights disappearing around the corner of Main Street, both Betty and Frank knew their world had changed forever. The Golden Dragon had survived recessions, competition from chain restaurants, and the slow exodus of young people from small towns. Now it faced something far more dangerous, an enemy with a plan, resources, and the willingness to use violence against anyone who stood in their way. The sanctuary they'd built over 18 years was under siege, and their unlikely protector was on his way to the hospital with blood on his temple and darkness in his future. The war for Millfield's soul had begun, and the first battle had been lost. The harsh fluorescent lights of Millfield General Hospital's emergency room cast everything in stark relief as Jackie slowly opened his eyes. His head felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it, and the steady beeping of monitors reminded him that his invincibility was more Hollywood myth than reality. "Easy there, movie star," came a voice with the no-nonsense authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with trauma patients. "You've got a concussion that would drop a horse." Dr. Patricia Reeves appeared in his field of vision, tall, lean, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. At 68, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd worked emergency medicine for 35 years and had seen everything the world could throw at human beings. "Dr. Reeves," Jackie managed, his voice hoarse. "How long was I out?" 6 hours. Long enough for half the town to call asking about Jackie Chan's condition. She checked his pupils with a penlight, her touch gentle but professional. "Mild concussion, bruised ribs, nothing permanent if you take it easy. Which, knowing your reputation, you probably won't." Jackie tried to sit up, but her firm hand on his shoulder kept him horizontal. "The restaurant. Frank and Betty. Are they there?" "Fine. Shaken up, but fine. It's the others I'm worried about." Dr. Reeves pulled up a chair, her expression growing serious. "Jackie, that animal who attacked you? Tank Morrison. He's been terrorizing restaurants all over town for the past 3 months." The name meant nothing to Jackie, but the systematic nature of the attacks sent alarm bells ringing in his still foggy brain. Restaurants? What kind of pattern? Always the same routine. Targets ethnic places, older owners who can't fight back. Claims he's just a drunk looking for trouble, but it's too organized, too deliberate. Dr. Reeves opened a folder thick with newspaper clippings and medical records. Kim's Korean Barbecue closed 2 months ago after Tank put the owner's son in the hospital. Mumbai Palace shut down after he terrorized customers 3 nights running. Casa Rodriguez sold their building for half what it was worth after Tank's crew made it impossible to operate. Jackie's martial artist mind recognized tactical intelligence when he heard it. This wasn't random violence. It was warfare disguised as drunken bullying. All ethnic restaurants. All older owners. Every single one. And here's the kicker. Within a week of each closing, Pinnacle Development Group swooped in with offers to buy the properties. Lowball offers that suddenly looked generous to desperate families who just wanted out. The pieces began falling into place despite the pounding in Jackie's head. Tank's parting words hadn't been random threats. They'd been a business proposition delivered through violence. Someone was using fear as a real estate strategy, and elderly restaurant owners were the perfect targets. "Dr. Reeves, how long have you been eating at Golden Dragon?" 15 years. "Frank and Betty are like family to me." Her voice carried the protective edge of someone who'd watched too many good people get hurt by forces beyond their control. "That's why I'm telling you this, Jackie. Tank Morrison isn't working alone, and he isn't finished. What happened today was just the opening move." Jackie closed his eyes, processing the implications. He'd come to Millfield seeking anonymity and peace, wanting to experience real American community. Instead, he'd walked into a war where the weapons were intimidation, and the battlefield was everything decent people had built together. "Doctor, I need you to tell me everything you know about these restaurant closures. Every detail, every connection you can think of. She checked the hallway, then closed the door. I was hoping you'd say that. The morning sun painted Tommy Rodriguez's modest ranch house in warm hues as Jackie approached the front door, dark sunglasses hiding the spectacular black eye that Tank Sucker Punch had left behind. His old friend was kneeling in the garden, tending roses with the same meticulous care he'd once brought to coordinating Hollywood's most dangerous stunts. Tommy looked up at the sound of footsteps, his weathered face breaking into a grin that died the moment he saw Jackie's injuries. At 71, Tommy carried himself with the careful dignity of someone whose body bore the accumulated damage of 5 decades in the stunt business, but his mind remained sharp as a razor. Jesus, Jackie, I heard what happened, but seeing it. Tommy rose slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. Come on, coffee's on, and we need to talk. They settled on Tommy's back porch, where the scent of Elena's rose garden still lingered too. Years after her death, the comfortable silence of old friends stretched between them until Tommy finally spoke. I recommended Golden Dragon because I wanted you to see real America. Good people living simple lives, building something that lasts. Didn't expect you to walk into a war zone. Jackie sipped his coffee, grateful for the caffeine despite his lingering headache. Dr. Reeves thinks it's more than random violence. Says Tank Morrison has been systematically targeting ethnic restaurants across town. She's right. My granddaughter Maria's been investigating it for her senior project at Ohio State. Started as an academic exercise about urban development, but she's uncovered something bigger. Tommy pulled out his phone. Maria? Yeah, it's Grandpa. Can you come over? I've got someone you need to meet. While they waited, Tommy filled in the background. After Elena's death, he'd moved to Millfield to be closer to his daughter Carmen and granddaughter Maria. The quiet town reminded him of his own childhood in East LA before Hollywood discovered him, back when neighborhoods meant something and people looked out for each other. Maria's got Elena's fire, Tommy said with obvious pride. Sees injustice and can't let it go. Been working on this story for months, connecting dots that nobody else bothered to notice. 20 minutes later, a battered Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. Maria Rodriguez emerged carrying a worn leather messenger bag that looked ready to burst with documents. At 22, she moved with the focused energy of someone on an important mission, her grandfather's intelligent brown eyes blazing with her grandmother's legendary determination. Grandpa said, holy shit, you're actually Jackie Chan. She stopped dead on the porch steps, starstruck for exactly 3 seconds before her journalist instincts took over. The guy from Golden Dragon yesterday. You're the one Tank Morrison attacked. Maria, Tommy warned, but Jackie raised a hand. It's okay. Your grandfather says you've been investigating what happened to the other restaurants. I'd like to hear what you found. Maria's expression shifted from excitement to grim determination as she spread her research materials across Tommy's kitchen table. Newspaper clippings, property records, photographs of closed restaurants, and a hand-drawn timeline that looked like a detective's murder board. It's all connected, she began, pointing to a pattern that became obvious once laid out properly. Every restaurant Tank visits gets an offer from Pinnacle Development Group within days. Always lowball offers that get accepted after the owners are too scared to keep operating. Jackie studied the documents with growing alarm. Kim's Korean barbecue offer received 3 days after Tank's attack. Mumbai Palace. Pinnacle's representatives arrived while the owner was still in the hospital. Casa Rodriguez. Tank's intimidation campaign lasted a week before the family accepted an offer at 60% of market value. Look at this, Maria continued, pulling out architectural plans. Pinnacle's been quietly filing permits for something called Millfield Town Center, a massive shopping complex that would demolish 6 blocks of the historic district. Golden Dragon sits right in the middle of the planned footprint. Tommy leaned over the plans, his stunt coordinator's eye for detail picking up what others might miss. These permits are dated 6 months ago, before any of the restaurants closed. They knew exactly which properties they needed. The implications hit Jackie like a physical blow. This wasn't opportunistic development following natural business failures. It was economic warfare with Tank Morrison as the tip of the spear. Someone had identified every obstacle to their grand plan and systematically eliminated them through fear and violence. Who owns Pinnacle Development? Jackie asked, and Maria's smile was grim. That's where it gets interesting. The company's owned by Douglas Brennan, Millfield City Councilman who's been pushing hard for urban renewal projects. The final piece clicked into place. Political cover, criminal muscle, and million-dollar profits, all wrapped in the respectable language of civic improvement. Tank's attack on Golden Dragon hadn't been random bullying. It had been a business strategy disguised as violence. Maria, Jackie said quietly, I think your academic project just became something much more dangerous. Chapter 11. Maria Rodriguez spread her research across Tommy's kitchen table like a general planning a campaign. Her months of investigation finally finding an audience that understood its importance. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated documents that painted a picture of systematic corruption disguised as civic progress. Pinnacle Development isn't just buying properties, she explained, her voice carrying the intensity of someone who'd spent sleepless nights connecting dots others had missed. They're engineering the failures that make the sales inevitable. Jackie studied the architectural plans with growing amazement at their scope. The proposed Millfield Town Center would obliterate 6 blocks of the historic downtown, replacing family-owned businesses with corporate chains and turning the community's heart into a sterile shopping mall. Look at the timeline, Maria continued, pointing to her hand-drawn chart. Pinnacle files permits in January. Tank Morrison starts his harassment campaign in February. By July, they've acquired 4 of the 6 properties they need at basement prices. Only Golden Dragon and Luigi's Villa are still holding out. Tommy leaned back in his chair, his stunt coordinator's mind recognizing a perfectly choreographed sequence when he saw one. It's brilliant in a sick way. Create the crisis, then swoop in as the solution. The families think they're lucky to get any offer at all. The documentation was overwhelming. Tank's random attacks followed a precise pattern, escalating harassment, until the target businesses became unsustainable, followed immediately by Pinnacle's generous buyout offers. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental, the profits too enormous to be ignored. Here's where it gets really ugly, Maria said, pulling out financial records she'd obtained through student journalist channels. Councilman Douglas Brennan has been taking consulting fees from Pinnacle while publicly supporting the project as necessary urban renewal. He's been paid to eliminate his own constituents' livelihoods. Jackie felt his anger building as he processed the full scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just business. It was cultural genocide, the deliberate destruction of everything that made communities worth preserving. The Golden Dragon represented 40 years of American immigrant success, and someone was trying to erase it for shopping mall profits. The federal angle makes it worse, Maria continued. Brennan's been applying for urban development grants, claiming the area is economically distressed due to business failures. He's literally getting paid twice, once by Pinnacle to clear the land, and again by taxpayers to rebuild it. Tommy whistled low. So Tank terrorizes the businesses into closing. Brennan claims the area needs renewal because of all the closures, and Pinnacle gets federal money to build their mall on land they acquired through intimidation. Exactly. It's a perfect closed loop of corruption. Maria's eyes blazed with her grandmother's legendary fire. And yesterday, when Tank attacked Golden Dragon, he wasn't just bullying elderly people. He was executing the next phase of a million-dollar conspiracy. Jackie stood and walked to the window, staring out at the peaceful neighborhood where Tommy had found refuge after Hollywood. Somewhere out there, Tank Morrison was probably planning his next attack, while Councilman Brennan sat in his office counting bribes, and the good people of Millfield went about their lives unaware that their community was being systematically dismantled. Maria, this investigation of yours, how much of it can you prove in court? Most of it. I've got paper trails, financial records, testimony from the other restaurant families. What I don't have is direct evidence linking Tank to Pinnacle or Brennan. He's insulated by layers of plausible deniability. Then we get that evidence, Jackie said, turning back to face them. But first, we make sure Frank and Betty understand what they're really up against. This isn't just about saving one restaurant anymore. It's about saving the soul of an entire community. Tommy nodded slowly. Jackie's right. But Maria, if we're going after Brennan and Pinnacle, you need to understand the stakes. These people have already shown they're willing to use violence. Once we move against them, there's no going back. Maria's smile reminded Jackie of every determined young person he'd ever worked with in Hollywood. Bright, fierce, and absolutely fearless in the face of overwhelming odds. Grandpa, they picked the wrong community to mess with. And they definitely picked the wrong restaurant to threaten while Jackie Chan was having lunch. The war for Millfield's soul was about to begin in earnest, and now they had weapons to fight back with: truth, courage, and the kind of righteous anger that toppled empires. The Golden Dragon looked like a crime scene when Jackie arrived that afternoon, its broken front window covered with plywood that bore the scars of Tank's violence. Frank Kowalski stood amid the debris, sweeping glass with the methodical patience of someone trying to restore order to a shattered world. Betty emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of tea, her silver hair still neat despite everything they'd endured. Her smile when she saw Jackie was worth more than any movie premiere applause he'd ever received. "Mr. Charlie, Jackie," she said, setting down the tray with hands that barely trembled. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I deserve after letting that coward get the drop on me." Jackie accepted the tea gratefully, noting how Frank and Betty had instinctively prepared his usual order despite everything that had changed. "But I'm more worried about both of you. And I think it's time you knew exactly what you're up against." Over the next hour, Jackie laid out everything Maria's investigation had revealed: the systematic targeting of ethnic restaurants, Pinnacle Development's grand plan, Councilman Brennan's corruption, and Tank Morrison's role as the tip of a very dirty spear. Frank and Betty listened with growing alarm as their simple restaurant business was revealed to be ground zero in a battle for their community's survival. 40 years, Frank said quietly when Jackie finished. 40 years we've been building something good here, and these people want to tear it down for a shopping mall. They're not just tearing down the building, Betty added, her voice carrying steel beneath the gentleness. They're trying to erase everything we've built together, all the relationships, all the memories, all the love that makes this place special. The afternoon brought a steady stream of regular customers, each one horrified by the damage and determined to show support. Harold Patterson arrived with his face bandaged but his spirit unbroken, followed by Marge carrying a casserole. "Because nobody should have to cook after what you've been through." Dr. Reeves stopped by between hospital shifts, her medical expertise allowing her to check Jackie's injuries while her community connections provided intelligence about Tank's previous victims. The retired factory workers showed up as a group, their combined 80 years of union organizing experience making them natural allies in any fight against powerful interests trying to crush working people. "What we need," Harold said, settling carefully into his usual booth, "is a way to fight back. I didn't survive the Pacific Theater just to watch some punk in a pickup truck destroy everything decent people have built." Jackie had been thinking the same thing. Tank Morrison's greatest weapon was the isolation and helplessness of his victims. Elderly restaurant owners facing a mountain of violence felt they had no choice but to surrender. But what if they weren't alone? What if the entire community stood together? "I have an idea," Jackie said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded film sets for decades. "But it's going to require all of us working together, and it might be dangerous." Betty laughed, a sound like silver bells that somehow made the boarded-up window seem less ominous. "Honey, we're 72 years old and running a restaurant in a small town where thugs attack customers in broad daylight. Dangerous is what we had for breakfast." "What did you have in mind?" Frank asked. Jackie looked around the damaged restaurant, seeing not the broken glass and overturned chairs, but the faces of people who had found family and shared meals and simple kindness. These weren't helpless victims, they were Americans who had built lives worth defending, and it was time to remind them of their own strength. "We're going to teach everyone basic self-defense, not to turn you into fighters, but to give you confidence and show the community that we're not afraid." Jackie's plan began taking shape as he spoke. Tank Morrison succeeds because his victims feel isolated and powerless. But what if every regular customer here knew how to protect themselves and each other? Harold's eyes lit up with the fire of someone who had never backed down from a just fight. "You mean turn the Golden Dragon into headquarters for the resistance?" "Exactly. And if Tank Morrison wants to come back and terrorize more elderly people, he's going to find out that this community has teeth." The plan was audacious, probably impossible, and absolutely necessary. But as Jackie looked around the room at faces, filled with determination rather than fear, he realized something important. Tank Morrison had made a crucial tactical error when he chose to attack these particular people. He'd awakened something that had been sleeping, and now it was ready to fight back. The warehouse on the industrial side of town thrummed with bass music and barely controlled violence as Jackie approached the unmarked entrance. Two heavily tattooed men flanked the door, their eyes scanning for trouble or opportunity. In this world, the distinction meant little. Looking for some action, old man? One guard sneered, blocking Jackie's path. I heard this is where real fighters come to test themselves, Jackie replied, keeping his voice humble. The baseball cap and dark jacket helped disguise his identity, but his compact frame and confident posture marked him as someone worth watching. Inside, the converted warehouse reeked of sweat, alcohol, and blood. Makeshift bleachers surrounded a cleared area where bare-knuckle fighters traded devastating blows for the entertainment of men who bet on human suffering. The crowd was rough: bikers, construction workers, ex-cons looking for easy money or easier violence. At the center of it all sat Tank Morrison like a king holding court. Gold chains draped his massive frame, and sycophants clustered around him seeking approval or opportunity. Between matches, Jackie watched Tank conduct business with the efficiency of a crime boss, dispatching boys to handle problems around town. The Korean place folded faster than expected, Tank told one subordinate. Hit the Indian restaurant tomorrow night. Make it messy. Owner's got a daughter at state, and we want her worried about daddy. Jackie's hands clenched at the casual cruelty. These weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated psychological warfare designed to break spirits before breaking bones. The Tank's phone buzzed, and his demeanor changed instantly. Yeah, Vinny. No, the Chinese place is handled. Jackie Chan or no Jackie Chan, they'll be begging to sell by weekend. The name, Vinny, sent alarm bells ringing. This wasn't just Tank's operation. Someone higher up the food chain was pulling strings, and their timeline was accelerating. The Tank's eyes swept the crowd and locked onto Jackie's. Recognition flickered, followed by something like anticipation. Well, Tank announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. Looks like we got ourselves a celebrity. The warehouse crowd turned as one, following Tank's pointed finger to where Jackie stood frozen in the sudden spotlight. Conversations died, drinks were lowered, and the primitive energy that had been focused on the ring shifted toward this new source of drama. Ladies and gentlemen, Tank's voice boomed across the converted space. We got ourselves the one and only Jackie Chan. Movie star thinks he can come into MY house after what happened at that Chinese dump. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some excited by the celebrity sighting, others sensing the potential for real violence rather than staged entertainment. Money began changing hands as impromptu betting started on whatever was about to unfold. Jackie realized his cover was blown, but perhaps that created an opportunity. Tank's ego wouldn't let him back down from a public challenge, especially after their previous encounter had ended with Jackie unconscious on the sidewalk. I came here to give you a chance to settle this properly, Jackie said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. One-on-one, winner takes all. You win, I leave town forever. I win, you stop terrorizing innocent people. The crowd erupted in excitement. This was better than any staged match. A real grudge fight between the legendary martial artist and the local tough guy who'd already beaten him once. Tank's chest swelled with pride at being the center of attention, his need for validation overriding any tactical considerations. You sure about that, movie star? Last time we danced, you ended up taking a nap on the concrete. Tank stood slowly, his massive frame commanding attention. But I'm feeling generous tonight. Let's give these people a real show. The ring was quickly cleared, spectators pressing forward for the best view. This wasn't going to be some choreographed movie fight. This was raw, personal, and potentially deadly. Tank had 40 pounds and 20 years of cage fighting experience, plus the confidence that came from their previous encounter. But Jackie had something Tank didn't understand: the patience that came from decades of perfecting his craft and the wisdom that came from understanding the difference between performance and reality. Same rules as last time? Tank asked, cracking his knuckles. No rules at all. Whatever makes you comfortable, Jackie replied, removing his jacket. But this time, let's finish what we started. The crowd roared approval as both men entered the ring, but Jackie noticed something important. Several of Tank's boys were positioning themselves around the perimeter, ready to interfere if their boss started losing. This wasn't going to be the fair fight he'd proposed. The makeshift ring erupted in chaos as Tank charged forward with the subtlety of a freight train, his massive fists seeking to end the fight quickly. But this time, Jackie was ready for the raw aggression, his body moving with the fluid precision that had made him a legend. The Tank's first haymaker whistled past Jackie's ear as the smaller man flowed around the attack like water around stone. The follow-up uppercut met empty air as Jackie materialized behind his opponent, already positioning for his next defensive move. "Stand still and fight," Tank roared, spinning to face his elusive target. The crowd pressed forward, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't the brutal slugfest they'd expected. It was art in motion, a masterclass in using skill to overcome raw power. Jackie employed every inch of the ring, turning the ropes into springboards and the corner posts into pivot points. Tank grew increasingly frustrated with each missed punch, his technique deteriorating as exhaustion set in. Jackie, meanwhile, seemed to gain energy from the movement, his defensive flow becoming more elaborate with each exchange. A missed punch became an opportunity to redirect Tank into the ropes. An attempted tackle was transformed into Tank's own, momentum carrying him face-first into the canvas. The betting odds shifted dramatically as spectators realized they were watching something special. Harold Patterson and several other Golden Dragon regulars had somehow made their way into the warehouse, their presence adding emotional weight to what was already a highly charged atmosphere. "Come on, Jackie," Harold shouted, his bandaged face glowing with excitement. "Show him what real strength looks like." For 15 minutes, Jackie put on a clinic in defensive fighting, never throwing an offensive strike, but systematically breaking down Tank's aggression through superior technique and conditioning. The bigger man's breathing became labored, his movements slower and more predictable. Then Tank made his crucial mistake. He dropped his guard for a split second, exhausted and demoralized by his inability to land a clean shot. Jackie moved with lightning precision, his first offensive technique of the fight connecting with surgical accuracy. Tank dropped like a felled tree, his body hitting the canvas with a thud that silenced the entire warehouse. The crowd held its breath as the referee began counting, but it was clear the fight was over. 10. The count finished, and Jackie Chan stood victorious in the center of the ring. But as he raised his arms in triumph, Jackie noticed Tank's boys moving toward the ring with weapons in their hands, and his moment of victory transformed into a fight for survival. The warehouse erupted into chaos as three of Vinny's thugs stormed the ring with metal pipes, turning Jackie's moment of triumph into a desperate battle for survival. The crowd scattered as the fair fight devolved into an ambush, chairs overturning and spectators diving for cover. Jackie spun toward the first attacker, barely deflecting a pipe aimed at his skull. The metallic clang echoed through the warehouse as he redirected the weapon into the second thug's knee, dropping him instantly. But the third man was already swinging, forcing Jackie to roll under the ropes to avoid having his ribs caved in. "This is my fight," Tank roared from the canvas, struggling to his feet despite his defeat. For a moment, something like honor flickered in his eyes as he saw the unfair advantage his allies were trying to provide. Get away from him. But Tank's protest died as consciousness finally fled, his exhausted body collapsing back to the canvas. Whatever redemption he might have found in losing fairly was lost in the chaos of weapons and interference. Jackie found himself fighting multiple opponents in close quarters, his usual defensive style complicated by the pipes and chains his attackers wielded. This wasn't martial arts anymore. It was a street fight where skill mattered less than survival instinct. Harold Patterson, despite his age and recent injuries, grabbed a folding chair and swung it at one of the thugs. "Nobody fights alone in my town," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced worse odds in darker places. The warehouse dissolved into a riot as the crowd chose sides. Some fled toward the exits, while others joined the melee either for excitement or genuine outrage at the unfair tactics. Betty Kowalski appeared from nowhere, wielding her purse like a medieval mace and targeting kneecaps with the precision of her long-ago Golden Gloves training. "The fight's over," someone screamed. Chan won fair and square. But fairness had died the moment weapons entered the equation. Jackie fought his way toward the exit, protecting the elderly Golden Dragon supporters who'd risked everything to support him. The victory that should have ended Tank's reign of terror had become meaningless in the face of organized criminal interference. As police sirens wailed in the distance. Jackie realized the stakes had escalated beyond personal grudges or restaurant harassment. Vinny Torino, whoever he was, had just declared war on anyone who stood in his way. The underground fight was over, but the real battle for Millfield's soul was just beginning. 3 hours later, the Golden Dragon exploded in flames. Molotov cocktails crashing through its windows in a coordinated arson attack that lit up the night sky like a funeral pyre for everything the community had built together. The smoking ruins of the Golden Dragon stretched before them like a grave, marker for everything decent in Millfield. Dawn light filtered through the skeletal remains of what had been a sanctuary, revealing twisted metal where the lucky cat had smiled and charred timber where families had celebrated birthdays for 40 years. Frank Kowalski collapsed on the sidewalk, his hand clutching his chest as the full weight of devastation crashed over him. 40 years of dreams, memories, and community love reduced to ash and twisted metal in a few hours of calculated destruction. The heart attack came swift and merciless, his 72-year-old body simply unable to process such complete loss. "Frank! Oh God, Frank!" Betty's scream cut through the morning air as her husband crumpled beside the ruins of their life's work. She fell to her knees, her small hands frantically checking for a pulse while paramedics raced from the ambulance that had arrived with the fire trucks. Jackie stood frozen in horror, watching the woman who had served him tea and kindness twice a week for 8 months become a widow in real time. The elderly man who had welcomed him with such dignity was being loaded onto a stretcher, oxygen mask covering his gentle face, while around them the community's heart burned to the ground. "He's alive," the paramedic called out, but barely. "We need to move now." Betty climbed into the ambulance without looking back at the smoldering restaurant, her entire focus on the man she'd loved for 47 years. As the vehicle disappeared toward Millfield General, its sirens echoing off empty storefronts, Jackie felt the full weight of his failure settle on his shoulders. Harold Patterson stood beside him, tears streaming down his bandaged face as he surveyed the destruction. "They did this because we fought back, because we wouldn't just roll over and die quietly." The message was clear and brutal. Vincent Torino had escalated beyond harassment into outright terrorism, proving that resistance would be met with total destruction. Tank Morrison's fists had been replaced by gasoline and matches, personal violence upgraded to community annihilation. Dr. Reeves arrived as the fire department finished their work, her medical bag in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. Her face showed the strain of someone who'd spent the night treating burn victims and smoke inhalation cases, but her eyes blazed with fury. 3 restaurants hit simultaneously, she reported grimly. Soul Garden, Mumbai Palace, and what's left of this place. Professional job, accelerants placed for maximum damage, timing coordinated to overwhelm emergency services. Maria Rodriguez emerged from her car carrying camera equipment, documenting the aftermath with the dedication of someone who understood that evidence would be crucial for whatever came next. Her grandfather Tommy followed, his stunt coordinators. "I already cataloging the tactical precision of the attack." "Vinny's sending a message," Tommy said quietly. "Fight us, and we'll burn everything you love." Jackie stared at the ruins where he'd found peace, community, and purpose, where Frank and Betty had treated him like family, where Harold and Marge had shown him the dignity of genuine American values, where simple kindness had flourished for 4 decades. Tank Morrison had started this war with his fists. Vincent Torino had escalated it with fire. Now the community lay scattered and broken, their anchor reduced to ash, their patriarch fighting for his life in a hospital bed. The battle for Millfield's soul had been lost in a single night of flames, and their enemies were already preparing to claim their victory. The Sleepy Inn motel squatted beside Route 9 like a monument to failure, its neon sign flickering weakly against the gray afternoon sky. Jackie sat in his rental car outside room 237, staring at the peeling paint and broken concrete that had become Tank Morrison's refuge from the wreckage of his own making. The underground fight scene contacts had been surprisingly helpful once. They understood Jackie wasn't seeking revenge, just answers. Tank had disappeared after the warehouse riot, his trailer abandoned, his pickup truck found burned out by the river. But desperate men followed predictable patterns, and the Sleepy Inn was where Millfield's lost souls went to drink themselves to death. Jackie knocked on the door and waited. The sound of stumbling footsteps and muttered curses preceded the door's opening, revealing Tank Morrison as Jackie had never seen him, broken, hollow-eyed, and reeking of whiskey and despair. "Come to finish the job?" Tank slurred, swaying in the doorway. Empty bottles littered the floor behind him like casualties of a private war. "Can't say I blame you. I got it coming. I came to talk," Jackie said simply. "May I come in?" Tank's laugh was bitter and self-loathing. "Sure. Welcome to paradise." He stumbled back into the wreckage of his temporary life, collapsing into a chair that had seen better decades. The room was a shrine to self-destruction. Pizza boxes, beer cans, and whiskey bottles covered every surface. Tank himself had lost at least 20 pounds, his once imposing frame now gaunt and trembling. The mountain of violence who had terrorized Golden Dragon was gone, replaced by a man drowning in the consequences of his choices. "Frank Kowalski's in the hospital," Jackie said quietly. "Heart attack," when he saw what was left of his restaurant. Tank's face crumpled like paper. Did he? "He's alive. Barely. Betty's been at his bedside for 2 days straight." Jackie pulled up the room's other chair, noting the way Tank flinched at his approach. "You need to know something, Tank. I don't think you intended for any of this to happen." "Doesn't matter what I intended. That old man's dying because of what I started." Tank reached for another bottle, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "You know what the funny thing is? I actually like them. Frank and Betty. They reminded me of my grandparents before I became this." Jackie had come here, expecting to find his enemy, but instead found something more complex. A man whose soul had been crushed by his own actions. "Tank, I need to know about Vinnie Torino. About the plan to destroy these restaurants." Tank's laugh was hollow. "Plan? There wasn't no plan, not at first. I was just muscle for hire, taking out my anger on people who couldn't fight back. But Vinnie, he saw something bigger. Systematic. Turned my rage into a business model." The story poured out in fragments. Tank's career ending in humiliation, his descent into alcohol and depression, Vinnie's recruitment of him as intimidation for hire. What had started as random violence became organized terrorism, with Councilman Brennan providing political cover and Pinnacle Development reaping the profits. "This weekend," Tank mumbled, his words slurring together. "Vinnie's hitting 3 more places. Soul Garden, Mumbai Palace, Luigi's Villa. Wants the whole block cleared by Monday so Brennan can fast-track the development permits." Jackie felt ice in his veins. The Golden Dragon's destruction had been just the opening move. Vinnie planned to burn out every holdout business in a single coordinated strike, turning 6 blocks of community history into a vacant lot ready for corporate development. "Tank, I need your help to stop this." The request hung in the air like an impossible proposition. Tank stared at Jackie through bloodshot eyes, processing words that should have been meaningless coming from someone he'd terrorized and attacked. "You trust me? After everything I've done?" "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption," Jackie said. "But you have to choose it. You can drink yourself to death in this room, or you can help me save what's left of the community you helped destroy." Tank looked at his reflection in the motel mirror, bloated, scarred, lost, then back at Jackie. "What do you need me to do?" Tommy Rodriguez's garage had been transformed into a war room, with Maria's investigation materials spread across every available surface and Jackie's alliance with Tank creating an atmosphere of cautious hope mixed with desperate urgency. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked a community under siege, where 3 more beloved restaurants would burn unless they could stop Vincent Torino's final assault. Tank Morrison sat uncomfortably on a folding chair, sober for the first time in months and visibly struggling with withdrawal symptoms. His massive frame seemed diminished by guilt and self-awareness, But his knowledge of Vinny's operation made him invaluable despite the distrust radiating from Maria and Tommy. Soul Garden goes first, Tank explained, his voice hoarse but steady. Vinny's boys hit it at 11:15, right after the kitchen staff leaves, but before the security system activates. They've been watching the patterns for weeks. Jackie studied the hand-drawn map Tommy had created, marking each target restaurant with red circles that looked ominously like bullseyes. Mumbai Palace? 11:30. Owner's got a sick kid at home, so he leaves early on Saturdays. Vinny knows everything about these people, their schedules, their weaknesses, their pressure points. Tank's self-loathing was evident in every word. That's what I gave him. I watched them, learned their routines, reported back like some kind of predator. Maria looked up from her laptop where she'd been coordinating with federal investigators, who had finally taken interest in the systematic nature of the attacks. Luigi's villa is the big prize. If they can torch all three in one night, Brennan can declare the entire district economically devastated and fast-track the development permits. The plan they devised was audacious and probably impossible, but it was the only chance they had. The community would position watch teams at each restaurant, using Jackie's defensive techniques to protect the buildings rather than confront the arsonists directly. Tank would use his insider knowledge to predict timing and methods, while Maria documented everything for the federal case. Betty Kowalski arrived as they finalized details, her face drawn with exhaustion from 2 days at Frank's bedside. But her eyes blazed with the determination that had carried her through 7 decades of challenges. "Frank's stable," she announced, awake and asking about the restaurant. "When I told him what you're planning, he said to tell you that the Golden Dragon's spirit doesn't die just because the building burned down." Harold Patterson appeared in the garage doorway, leaning on his walker but radiating the authority of someone who had faced worse enemies in darker times. "Marge is organizing the ladies from the church. We've got volunteers for all 3 locations." Dr. Reeves arrived with medical supplies and communication equipment. "Hospitals on standby. Whatever happens tonight, we'll be ready." As the afternoon wore on, the garage filled with elderly faces that showed determination rather than fear. These were people who had built lives worth defending, and they weren't going to surrender their community to corporate greed and criminal violence without a fight. Tank watched the preparations with growing amazement. "I don't understand. Why are you all willing to risk this? These restaurants, they're just businesses." Harold Patterson fixed Tank with the steady gaze of someone who had learned hard truths in hard places. "Son, they're not just businesses. They're the places where we found family after our children moved away, where we celebrated birthdays and mourned losses, where we learned that community isn't about where you come from, it's about who stands with you when things get dark." Tank nodded slowly, beginning to understand what he had been trying to destroy. "What do you need me to do?" Jackie looked around the garage at faces filled with quiet courage and realized that Vinny Torino had made the same mistake Tank had made at Golden Dragon. He had underestimated the power of people who refused to be victims. "Help us save what's left," Jackie said, "and maybe find a way to forgive yourself in the process." The battle for Millfield's soul was about to begin, and for the first time since the Golden Dragon burned, Jackie believed they might actually win. Saturday night descended on Millfield like a held breath, the community's elderly defenders taking positions around 3 restaurants that represented the last stand against corporate destruction. The October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter, but also something else: the electric tension of people who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. Jackie surveyed Soul Garden from across the street, watching Harold Patterson's team settle into concealment behind parked cars and doorways. At 78, Harold moved with the careful precision of someone whose body remembered military training even when it could no longer execute it flawlessly. Marge Patterson sat in their car with a thermos of coffee and a cell phone, ready to coordinate communications. Team 1 in position, Harold's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie Dr. Reeves had provided. Despite his age and recent injuries, he had insisted on leading the most dangerous assignment point 2 blocks away. Betty Kowalski had positioned her group around Mumbai Palace with the strategic thinking of someone who had managed a restaurant's chaos for decades. Her team included 2 retired firefighters who understood exactly how to counter arson attempts. Garden hoses prepositioned, sprinkler systems activated, fire department on speed dial. Team 2 ready. Betty's voice came through clearly. The determination in those 3 words carried the weight of 47 years of marriage and a lifetime of protecting what mattered most. Jackie and Tank took Luigi's villa, the largest target and the one Vinny would hit hardest. Tank's knowledge of the criminal organization's methods had been invaluable. He knew which windows they'd target, what accelerants they preferred, how they'd attempt to overwhelm the building's defenses. "You sure about this?" Tank asked for the dozenth time, his newly sober mind struggling with the concept of protection rather than destruction. "These people, they're trusting me after everything I've done to them. Redemption isn't about deserving forgiveness," Jackie replied quietly. "It's about choosing to become someone worthy of it." At exactly 11:15 p.m., Vinny's arsonist struck Soul Garden with military precision. 3 men approached the building, carrying gasoline cans and Molotov cocktails, expecting to find an empty restaurant with minimal security. Instead, they walked into a carefully prepared defensive zone. Harold Patterson's team didn't try to fight the younger, stronger criminals. Instead, they used Jackie's techniques to create obstacles and confusion. Garbage cans appeared in the arsonist's path. Garden hoses activated from unexpected directions. Car alarms triggered in sequence, creating noise and chaos that attracted police attention. Soul Garden secure. Harold's voice carried triumph despite the danger. Package delivered. The package was Maria's hidden cameras and recording equipment, capturing every face and every illegal act for the federal investigation. But more importantly, the restaurant was safe. Mumbai Palace's defense went even more smoothly. Betty's team of elderly church ladies had turned garden club tactics into urban warfare, their knowledge of sprinkler systems and fire suppression making the arsonist's job impossible. The criminals fled when they realized their accelerants were being washed away faster than they could place them. Team 2 successful, Betty reported. Building secure, evidence collected, bad guys running like scared rabbits. But Luigi's villa was where Vinny had concentrated his main force. 6 men approached the large restaurant with enough accelerants to create an inferno visible from 3 counties. This wasn't just arson. It was a statement that resistance would be met with overwhelming destruction. Tank Morrison stood beside Jackie in the shadows, watching his former associates prepare to destroy another piece of Millfield's soul. For a moment, the temptation to run was almost overwhelming, old habits of self-preservation warring with newfound purpose. Then he saw Vincent Torino himself step out of a black Cadillac, his expensive suit and cold eyes representing everything that was wrong with using violence to steal from communities. This was the man who had turned Tank's pain into a weapon against innocent people. "There he is," Tank whispered. "The man who made me into a monster." Jackie studied Torino with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades reading opponents. "Then let's make sure he doesn't do it to anyone else." The final battle was about to begin, and everything the community had built over generations hung in the balance. Vincent Torino stepped from his black Cadillac with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. At 52, he moved like someone accustomed to others doing his fighting, his expensive suit and manicured hands marking him as the type of criminal who preferred boardrooms to back alleys. "Burn it all," he commanded his 6-man crew. "I want this place visible from space." But as his arsonists approached Luigi's villa with military-grade incendiary devices, they walked into a trap 2 months in the making. Jackie emerged from the shadows with fluid grace, while Tank Morrison stepped into view, no longer the broken drunk from the motel, but a man who had found something worth protecting. "Hello, Vinny," Tank said, his voice carrying new authority. "Fancy meeting you here." Torino's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally cold calculation. "Tank, I heard you'd lost your nerve after that Chinese place went up. Didn't expect to see you playing hero." "Funny thing about hitting rock bottom," Tank replied. "Makes you realize what you should have been fighting for all along." The arsonists spread out in a tactical formation, their experience evident in how they moved to surround Jackie and Tank. But they hadn't counted on Harold Patterson's team emerging from concealment behind them, or Betty Kowalski's church ladies, blocking their escape routes with strategically positioned vehicles. "You're outnumbered, old man," Torino snarled at Jackie. "This isn't some movie where the good guys always win." "You're right," Jackie said calmly. This is real life, where communities protect each other and bullies eventually face justice. The fight that followed was unlike anything in Jackie's long career. This wasn't choreographed movie combat or exhibition matches. This was six desperate criminals with nothing to lose against two unlikely allies backed by a community that refused to surrender. Jackie flowed through the group like water through rocks, his defensive style turning their numbers against them. When one attacker swung a crowbar, Jackie redirected it into his partner's knee. When another charged with a knife, Jackie used his momentum to send him crashing into a parked car. Tank fought differently now, not with the mindless rage that had made him Vinny's perfect weapon, but with controlled strength focused on protection rather than destruction. His knowledge of the crew's tactics made him invaluable, anticipating their moves and countering their strategies. "The big guy's on your left," Tank called out, intercepting a flanking maneuver. "Watch the one with the chain." Harold Patterson, despite his walker and recent injuries, managed to trip two fleeing arsonists with precision that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. Betty Kowalski's ladies provided support from the periphery, their garden club tactics proving surprisingly effective in urban combat. But Vinny Torino had one final card to play. As his crew fell around him, he pulled a chrome-plated pistol from his jacket and aimed it directly at Jackie's chest. "Game over, movie star." The chrome pistol gleamed under the streetlights as Vinny Torino took careful aim at Jackie's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger with the cold precision of someone who had crossed every moral line years ago. The criminal mastermind who had orchestrated months of terror was about to claim his final victory through the most primitive method available. "This isn't how your movies end, is it?" Torino sneered, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. But Tank Morrison saw the gun before Jackie did, his peripheral vision catching the metallic flash in time to realize what was about to happen. The man who had once terrorized innocent people for money found himself facing the moment that would define everything he chose to become. "Jackie!" Tank's warning came as he threw himself between the gun and its target, his massive frame absorbing the bullet that had been meant for Jackie's heart. The .45 caliber round caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the asphalt in a spray of blood. The sacrifice gave Jackie the opening he needed. While Torino stared in shock at Tank's unexpected heroism, Jackie moved with the lightning precision that had made him legendary. A spinning kick sent the gun flying into the darkness, clattering across the pavement like discarded hope. Torino stumbled backward, his confidence evaporating as he realized his last advantage was gone. "You don't understand what you're messing with. This goes all the way to City Hall." "Brennan's finished," Maria Rodriguez announced, emerging from her hiding spot with camera equipment and a satisfied smile. "Everything's been recorded. Federal agents are already moving on his office." Dr. Reeves appeared with her medical bag, dropping to her knees beside Tank's bleeding form. "Somebody call an ambulance. And get me clean towels. This man just saved Jackie's life." Tank lay on the cold asphalt, his face pale, but his eyes clear for the first time in months. "Doc, did we stop them? Are the restaurants safe? Soul Garden secure?" Harold's voice crackled through the radio. "Mumbai Palace is safe. And Luigi's villa isn't going anywhere." Tank's smile was worth more than any movie premiere applause Jackie had ever received. "Good. That's good." Police sirens wailed in the distance as Millfield's finest finally arrived to clean up the mess that federal investigators had been tracking for weeks. Torino's crew was scattered and defeated, their leader facing charges that would keep him away from decent communities for the rest of his natural life. Jackie knelt beside Tank, pressing his hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Why did you do it? After everything that's happened between us?" Tank's laugh was weak but genuine. "Because for the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to be one of the good guys. Besides, you taught me something important. Real strength comes from protecting people, not hurting them." The ambulance arrived with its red lights painting the scene in emergency colors, paramedics working quickly to stabilize Tank for transport. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Betty Kowalski approached with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing Tank's uninjured hand. "Frank's going to want to meet the man who helped save our community." "Mrs. Kowalski," Tank managed, his voice growing weaker. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know I can't undo." "Hush," Betty said gently. Tonight you chose to be a hero. That's what matters now. As the ambulance disappeared toward Millfield General Hospital, Jackie stood amid the wreckage of Torino's organization and realized that sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating enemies, but from helping them become allies. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold over Millfield Police Station, where Detective Ray Murphy sifted through evidence that painted a picture of corruption stretching from street-level intimidation to the highest levels of city government. Maria Rodriguez's months of investigation, combined with the previous night's documented crimes, had provided federal authorities with everything they needed to dismantle the entire conspiracy. "It's beautiful," Detective Murphy said, spreading photographs and financial records across his desk. "We've got racketeering, arson conspiracy, bribery, attempted murder, and about 15 other charges that'll put these clowns away until they're collecting Social Security." Jackie sat in the station's waiting area, his body aching from the night's combat, but his spirit lighter than it had been since the Golden Dragon burned. Through the window, he could see reporters gathering as word spread that Millfield's restaurant harassment campaign had been broken by an unlikely alliance of senior citizens and a reformed bully. Tank Morrison lay in Millfield General's surgical ward, his shoulder shattered but his conscience finally clear. The bullet that was meant for Jackie had done more than physical damage. It had completed Tank's transformation from community predator to community protector. Judge Margaret Chun would take that into account during sentencing, along with testimony from every person Tank had helped save. "The federal boys are having a field day," Murphy continued, shuffling through arrest warrants. "Torino's looking at 25 to life under RICO statutes. His crew's already rolling over, trying to cut deals. And Councilman Brennan," the detective's smile was predatory. "Let's just say his political career ended when FBI agents showed up at his house with search warrants." Dr. Reeves appeared in the station doorway, her medical bag in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. "Tank's stable. Bullet missed the major arteries, but he'll need months of physical therapy. He's asking for you, Jackie." The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and Tank's labored breathing. The man who had terrorized Golden Dragon customers looked small in the hospital bed, his massive frame diminished by pain medication and the weight of his actions. "They tell me Torino's finished," Tank said, his voice weak but steady. "Brennan too. Does that mean the restaurants are safe?" "Soul Garden, Mumbai Palace, and Luigi's Villa are all intact," Jackie confirmed. "Pinnacle Development's assets are being seized by federal marshals. The community's going to get its neighborhood back." Tank nodded slowly, processing the idea that his actions had finally resulted in protection rather than destruction. "What happens to me now?" Judge Chun had already outlined the deal. Tank would testify against Torino and Brennan in exchange for reduced charges and community service. Instead of prison, he would spend the next 5 years rebuilding what he had helped destroy, working alongside the people he had once terrorized. "You get a chance to make things right," Jackie said. "The community's willing to give you that chance, if you're willing to take it." "I don't deserve their forgiveness." "Probably not," Jackie agreed. "But that's what makes it so powerful. These people understand that redemption isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose to become." Betty Kowalski appeared in the doorway carrying a covered dish that made the entire room smell like home cooking. "Thought you might be hungry," she said to Tank, her voice carrying the warmth that had made Golden Dragon a sanctuary for so many years. Tank stared at her in amazement. "Mrs. Kowalski, after what I did to your husband, to your restaurant." "Frank's going to be fine," Betty said firmly. "And as for the restaurant, well, sometimes things need to burn down before they can be built back better." She set the dish on Tank's bedside table and straightened his blankets with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades caring for others. "We're going to rebuild Golden Dragon bigger and better than before. Federal Victim Compensation Fund is covering everything, plus damages. We'll have room for community meetings, senior activities, maybe even a small clinic." Tank's eyes filled with tears as he processed this impossible kindness. "You'd still want me around? After everything?" "Honey," Betty said gently, "everyone deserves a second chance to become who they were meant to be. Besides, we're going to need someone strong to help elderly customers with their groceries." The transformation was complete. The community's greatest threat had become its newest protector point. 6 months later, The new Golden Dragon restaurant gleamed in the afternoon sun like a phoenix risen from ashes, twice the size of the original. It sprawled across the corner lot with a community meeting room, senior center, and small medical clinic attached. The grand reopening banner stretched across Main Street, and half of Millfield had turned out to celebrate. Frank Kowalski stood behind the expanded counter, his recovery complete and his smile brighter than Jackie had ever seen it. The heart attack had slowed him down for a few weeks, but the prospect of rebuilding something even better had energized him beyond his 72 years. "Mr. Charlie," Frank called out, using the name that had stuck despite everyone knowing Jackie's true identity. "Your table's ready." The corner booth remained exactly where it had always been, positioned so Jackie could watch the street and the community that had adopted him as family. But now the view included Tank Morrison moving carefully between tables, his left shoulder still stiff from surgery, but his hands gentle as he helped elderly customers to their seats. The transformation in Tank was remarkable. He had lost 50 pounds through honest work and honest living, his massive frame now carrying genuine strength rather than bloated rage. The anger that had consumed him for years had been replaced by purpose, protecting the people he had once terrorized, serving the community he had tried to destroy. "Mrs. Patterson, let me get that chair for you," Tank said, steadying Marge as she settled into her usual spot beside Harold. The elderly couple beamed at him with the kind of unconditional acceptance that had made their generation great. Harold Patterson had become something of a celebrity after leading the resistance against Torino's arsonists. At 78, he now taught self-defense classes every Tuesday evening, passing on Jackie's techniques to other seniors who wanted to feel empowered rather than vulnerable. "Tank's got a real gift for this," Harold observed, watching the former fighter help an elderly gentleman navigate his walker around the busy restaurant. Funny how the biggest, strongest guy in the room turned out to be the most gentle. Dr. Rees ran her free clinic in the community room twice a week, her medical expertise now serving people who might otherwise go without care. Maria Rodriguez had graduated from Ohio State with honors, her Golden Dragon investigation earning her a job offer from the Washington Post, though she'd decided to stay in Millfield and start the town's first real newspaper in decades. Tommy Rodriguez held court at a large table near the kitchen, regaling visitors with stories of his Hollywood days while keeping one eye on his granddaughter and another on his old friend Jackie. The former stunt coordinator had found new purpose in helping design the restaurant's accessibility features, ensuring that age and physical limitations wouldn't prevent anyone from enjoying the community space. The grand reopening celebration reached its peak. Jackie sat in his corner booth watching the scene unfold with deep satisfaction. The Golden Dragon had become more than a restaurant. It was proof that communities could fight back against those who would destroy them, that redemption was possible for anyone willing to choose it, and that sometimes the greatest victories came from turning enemies into protectors. Tank approached Jackie's table carrying a fresh pot of tea, his movements careful and respectful. "Mr. Chan, can I get you anything else?" "Just the tea, Tank. And my name's Jackie. I think we're past the formal stage." Tank's smile was worth more than any Hollywood award Jackie had ever received. "You know, I never did thank you properly for giving me a chance to become someone better." "We all gave each other that chance," Jackie replied, raising his teacup in a small toast. "That's what real community means." Through the window, they watched Harold Patterson teaching his grandson basic self-defense moves in the parking lot, passing on both technique and philosophy to the next generation. The Golden Dragon glowed with warm light and laughter, no longer just a restaurant, but a symbol of what happened when good people stood together against those who would destroy their way of life. Tank reached across to help an elderly customer with her coat, and Jackie nodded with satisfaction. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating enemies, but from helping them discover the heroes they had always been capable of becoming. The Golden Dragon was more than rebuilt. It was transformed, and so was everyone who had fought to save it. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.